Welcome to On the Chain.
So, all right. Anyhow, this is Toomey. This was from September. I think it's a really cool playthrough to listen because, and we'll add some commentary here. So let's go through this. See if I got volume check. Hopefully it's loud and clear. It should be. I did a check on it earlier. So,
among other things, is that not all cryptocurrencies are inherently securities, right? That's true.
There are a small number that aren't, but I think that, as Chair Clayton said when he was in front of Congress, I think very many of these facts and circumstances are investment contracts.
So here's my concern. So some are and some aren't, is basically what you're saying. And I'm concerned that the SEC has not provided sufficient definition for, and explained how it would apply the Howey Test, which I think is the court standard for determining when something is an investment contract. So for instance, stable coins do not have an inherent expectation of profit. They're just linked to the dollar. Now, you might use them in an attempt to make a profit, but that's a second order activity. Is it your view that stable coins themselves can be securities?
I think that, Senator, they may well be securities. As Thurgood Marshall wrote in the Reeves opinion, in defining the scope of the market that Congress, wished to regulate, Congress painted a broad brush, and it actually included about 35 different things inside the definition of a security in the 33 Act.
I've just got limited time here, so I acknowledge.
So he's referencing back to the Securities Act of 1933, giving a broad brush to the SEC to make a determination of what securities are. And Pat Toomey, this is again from September, but Pat Toomey is really arguing here that the SEC, has not provided clarity. So Gensler is always going to fall back on this notion that they have this broad brush to do basically what they want to do. Toomey is narrowing this in. Now, in a second here, Gensler is actually going to make one comment that we can agree with, but we have to wait for that to unfold. But Toomey is making some really, really critical points here in terms of the SEC not having true jurisdiction due to the lack of clarity and the overreach. And he's kind of alluding to that. But here, hang on one second.
Here's my problem, though. I think what you just said was that they may be securities, or that some are securities. To me, a stable coin doesn't meet the second prong of the Howey Test, that there has to be an expectation of profits from the investment. And so if it doesn't meet the Howey Test, it looks to me like it's not a security. Now, maybe you've got a good argument for why some are and some aren't. My whole point is, I think we need to have clarity on this. I think you should publicly disclose this. Apparently, there are private conversations where you work with people who are proposing particular structures and you give them advice, your staff gives them advice. I just think we ought to have that publicly, and we certainly shouldn't be taking enforcement action against somebody without having first provided that clarity.
That, before he answers, that is a great point, right? So what is the one, tenet that Gensler talks about? He talks about enforcement, the pillars of enforcement. So here Toomey is referencing you shouldn't be taking enforcement action if there isn't enough clarity to really make a determination as to what's a security or not a security. So obviously referencing the SEC v. Ripple case, obviously referencing the SEC v. Library case. So if you don't have a clear understanding of what should be deemed a security, why are you then taking enforcement action against these entities? And then Toomey's also referencing the Howey Test. So now the one thing that we know with Gensler, and I think it's important to go back to some of these videos, because you get to hear it firsthand and you understand the conflict of reality that is going on within the SEC And and trying to then understand where it's coming from. Then you see it all play out within the case because they don't have a case. They don't have a strong enough case, and they're not going back on all four prongs of the Howey test. They're only looking at one element. And that's exactly what Toomey referenced here. But let's go over to what our buddy Gensler has to say.
Well, Senator, this Congress could change the laws, but the laws that we have right now have a very broad definition of.
That's it. That's the one thing that we can agree on with Gensler, right? He said that this Congress can change the law. Now, and this goes back to Warren Davidson and Darren Soto in Congress introducing legislation for the Token Taxonomy Act. And so what Gary Gensler is basically saying is, you should have had, within Congress, you have the authority, you have the power to pass the legislation that's required in order to then have the SEC react and respond accordingly. But Gary Gensler is trying to dig in his heels here and making a statement that, in fact, he has broad purview, over determining what is a security and what isn't a security. And he can then himself define what is or what isn't a security. And so he's basically saying, hey, if you want to rein me in, then why don't you pass the legislation to do so? Now, he's broadly defining under his own opinion what is or isn't a security. So JMJ here is making a good point. They need to make Gensler repeat all four of the prongs exactly. So, and I would say the exact same thing. You can't just rest on one prong, which is what he always does. He doesn't look at all four prongs. And this is, we have to agree with him on this one point. He's like, hey, you want me to stop? It's up to you. Now it is Congress, because Congress has tripped all over themselves to not pass the proper legislation. But let's continue this for just a few more seconds, and then we have another video that we have to go through real quick.
Security, including a note, including an investment contract and the like. And my predecessor, Chair Clayton, and others actually put out a lot of guidance with regard to the Howey.
I just got to push back a little bit on that. It is broad, but it's well defined. There is a very specific litany of the instruments that constitute securities. As you know this better than I do. Investment contract is one of them. And there is a court decision that lays out the prongs for what constitutes an investment contract. I'm just saying, as a layman who can read English, when I read those tests, stable coins don't seem to meet that test to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I can misinterpret this, I think others could too. And some clarity, public clarity, I think would be helpful.
I see the red light, but I agree with you that
maybe we should just leave it at that. I agree with you.
Some of these tokens have been deemed to be commodities. Many of them are securities.
All right, we can leave it at that. So, we get the idea here. We see what's going on. And the one statement that Gensler made that was very clear and resonates, and the one, and the point that, Toomey is bringing up is that the verbiage, the clarity is actually there, right? The laws lay it out. Now, the one problem that we see within Congress, and we see it over and over and over again, that the laws are in the books, right? And then Congress comes and says, we need more laws. And then you look and you say, well, if you would only just address the laws that we already have, why do you have to write new laws if the laws are already there? Now, the thing is, with the Token Taxonomy Act, again, when we go back to the Securities Act of 33 or the Securities Exchange Act of 34, the notion there was that they want to amend those acts. They want to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. They want to make the amendment to include, clear language to include digital assets. So then it is even more clear as to, how you define a security for a digital asset perspective. So, I mean, you look at this guy, right? And you look at him and you're like, this is the guy that's making all sorts of decision, and it's just really, really bad form.
Are you down with OTC? Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when the next video drops.